My name is Schmidt. I'm here with Harry Peterson-Nedry. We're at Ridgecrest Vineyards in Ribbon Ridge. It's July 28th, 2021. Harry, thank you so much for joining us again, as always.
My pleasure.
And we're here today to talk about not just you, but about the PGI status that was recently announced for the Willamette Valley. So let's start with kind of the basics. What is the status and why was it important?
The thing that's most important is the Willamette Valley. And the Willamette Valley is an important growing region for fine, elegant, delicate grapes. And we've known that for a long time. Some people had enough vision to where they chose the Willamette Valley for those characteristics, the cool climate characteristics that sit so well with Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, those type of varieties, Riesling. Mm-hmm. So Willamette Valley is most important. We have successfully concluded work that began, I actually looked this up a few days ago, the first time that a group of people from around the world who have been focusing since the early aughts, like 2002, I remember attending a meeting, a round table in Washington, D.C. to talk about place names and protecting wine place names. This was a group in 2002 that wanted to protect those names that represent the area that is unique, that make unique products because of the characteristics of that place. So place name is important not only to wine, but it's important to cheese, and it's important to meats. It's important to a lot of things. We had people there from all the way from the U.S. trade representative to people from the trademark bureau to all the wine regions from significant places around the world. The Champenois have always been very prickly about place names being appropriated and used by others, so they help to stimulate us and poke us and let's get together. So there's been a group since 2002, 3, 4 that have gotten together with the sole purpose of creating an infrastructure and the principles and the general backing of wine regions around the world to protect place names. In 2005, this group of wine regions got together and signed an initial declaration of what we were up to. It's called the Declaration of Place. It was signed by 6 or 7, I forget which, individual regions from Champagne to Oporto to the Willamette Valley, Napa Valley, Walla Walla. So there were several wine regions from around the world. And our job from that point on was to raise awareness. And the awareness began, I think, sometimes as we talked to a wine region and those organizations that represented a wine region, the awareness it was already there. They just didn't know that there was a group that was focusing on it. We got together in 2005 for the signing, and I represented Oregon. And then every couple years, initially every year, and then every couple years we would get together and collect the new people who were interested in being involved and talk about PR that we were doing around this theme. In 2007, some of the real reasons for this being important really came to the fore. Napa Valley has always had a lot of pressure, maybe second only to Champagne. People using their name inappropriately, making Napa Valley wines or something that sounded very similar to Napa Valley. in some other country, let's say China or something like that. So Napa Valley was the first to really get serious about that because they had problems. And one of their initial steps was to go to other members within our group, and this group eventually became the group that's now named the Wine Origins Alliance. The Wine Origins Alliance represents all of the regions around the world, but very core to it are the EU countries. And so Napa Valley said, hey, let's go to the EU. You guys do a good job of recognizing and keeping people from using your names. So how about recognizing us? Napa Valley was recognized through fairly minimal work. They were very, very much early to the game. And they got, by 2007, they got recognition by the EU. They sent some documentation, a few letters, and visited back and forth once or twice, I think. But they got their what's called PGI, Protected, where am I? Geographical Indication. Their PGI was effective, and they had general support and even support in court from the EU as they fended off some of the use of Napa Valley. Mm-hmm. It was not long after that, 2008, I was saying I just found recently some notes that I had made from one of our group meetings where they said, someone suggested, well, how about the Willamette Valley come next after Napa Valley? And so I jotted it down. That was 2008. And so the work that I've done, admittedly embedded in the years of work, have been periods of procrastination, because I'm known for procrastination at times, or should be, I guess. So procrastination aside, we've done a lot of work over a lot of years. So 2008 to 2021, 13 years. It's important that the PGI be seen as what it is. It's a third party acknowledging that our region is unique, is significant, and deserves protection. That also is what we in the U.S. get from some of the federal departments, all the way from the trademark to the Department of Agriculture, and even the TTB. TTB, of course, assigns and recognizes AVAs, which are significant to us in the U.S. AVA, American Viticultural Area, is what Ribbon Ridge is, for example. Willamette Valley is a viticultural area. It was designated in 1983, if I'm not mistaken, and Dave Adelsheim and some others who I also asked to be a part of what we were doing with the PGI for the Willamette Valley. He was the one that was instrumental in getting the AVA designation for the Willamette Valley. But since then, there have been other efforts. We had to wait until the right time so that in some of our opinions, so that we didn't divide the industry. We wanted to wait until the right time to do sub-AVAs or nested AVAs inside the Willamette Valley. And that, even though we poked it a little bit to see if it was alive back in like 96. It wasn't until Alex Sokolblosser did another poke. I think I did one of the initial ones in 96. Alex poked us all in 2001. It might have even been 2000, the end of 2000, saying, let's get together on this. And so people who were interested, especially in the northern part of the Willamette Valley, got together. We talked about the pros and the cons to pulling out specific areas. And of course, the main con is that you begin to elevate some region of the valley over other regions of the valley. And so you need to either do it together or be ready for some very heightened criticism. And we were a very collaborative industry, have always been, and so it was significant that we do it at a time when we all thought it was now or never. And that happened in 2001 when we put together in one package what we had come up with a large steering committee that broke into individual parts to write the petitions for each AVA. Those AVAs included Ribbon Ridge, and of course Chehalem Mountains, Yamhill Carlton, the Eola Amity Hills, the Dundee Hills, and McMinnville. I don't think I'm leaving anybody out.
I think that's the original ones.
And since then, to your point, great, that there have been a couple additions to that. And what we all felt was important was that we go arm in arm with these. They were approved by the TTB in 2006 approximately, because some were earlier, some were later, 2005, 2006. And so since then, each individual viticultural area has had their own level of cooperative marketing or group think on things like viticulture. So it's been a positive experience. One of the things that is important is that the AVA process does a great job in defining who we are or where we are or what has happened in this area before we were there. So the name, the history, the bounds of what seemed logically to fit, the soils, and the weather components. So AVA was good.
So how did that compare, that kind of process of sort of dividing up the AVAs, how did that compare to what you were doing on the Willamette Valley scale? And why the length of time? Why did it, I mean, you mentioned procrastination, but why in addition to that did it take as long for the Willamette Valley to get recognition compared to the Napa Valley?
The PGI that we went after 2008 or so, we had spent most of our time since initially understanding that we needed to protect the Willamette Valley as what we didn't call a geographic indication, we would call an AVA, but everyone else in the world called them geographic indications. Once we realized that maybe we should protect the Willamette Valley, at that time the EU was also tightening up what it took for people to get protected geographic indication status. How much detail, in what areas, so it basically built this infrastructure that had to be satisfied. And that kept changing on an ongoing basis. So the number of times that I've submitted what I thought was adequate, all the way from what Napa Valley had submitted, and then they say, no, we've got a process here we want you to follow, all the way to defining that it needs to be 2 documents, and here's what those documents will be, and this is what it needs to look like, to general reviews of, you didn't put a specific number in here for the amount of sulfur that you will have. And okay, let me go back and I'll put it in. So all the way to very detailed review of our documents. That took a while, and we've been very seriously working on it for at least the last 7 or 8 years. And 13 years of kind of going back and forth and saying, yeah, let's do it. What does it look like? The PGI is good to have, even though we've got our AVA system. We also have state laws here in Oregon that are critically more, are critically tighter than in other wine regions in the world, and definitely in the U.S. Labeling laws are very, very strict. We had people, and this was a lucky happenstance. We began at a time when the people who were pioneers came with obviously a vision as to what they were seeking out, and they knew enough about wine and fine wine and the varieties that we're talking about to where they knew that there were philosophies or policies that need to be embedded in what creates the Willamette Valley or the Oregon wine industry in general. And so we instituted laws that said we can't use other people's wine names. If it's a region of the world and it's unique and it gives good reference for people identifying a product from that area versus some other area, then we don't want to use that. So you can't call your sparkling wine champagne, and you can't have a Burgundy because you aren't in Burgundy. And the same for other regions and other grape varieties. So we focused in on grape varieties, and while we're talking grape varieties, how much does it take to make a bottling that grape variety? The federal laws at that time, and up until about 10 to 15 years ago, it was 51%. So you had to have 1% over half and half to be called that variety. So Pinot Noir at 51% Pinot, and the rest of it Syrah or Chardonnay or anything else, that was okay to the federal government. They weren't into a quality assessment. They were into defining geography and climate and other things like that. So our pioneers here in Oregon knew what they were looking for as far as climate and soils and things. They also knew what they didn't want to violate, and there were certain principles that were critical. That was an important element that suggested to the Europeans that we were trustworthy and that we were the partner to go in and help along with Napa Valley in supporting the right way of doing things worldwide.
So how did this become your project specifically? How did you become the leader of it from the beginning? Was it something that you sought out to do, or was it something you kind of did out of necessity?
I had no personal necessity to do it, but I did have a desire to. I think we all in the industry need to have a view of the common good, and we need to work towards that common good. And when we have a chance to do it, we do it. It may be, now that we have so many, an industry that's as large as it is, maybe we don't have as many people who see that necessity. Maybe when there were fewer of us, we all wanted to emulate the first people in the valley and give something to that industry that was formative. So I think it's important to work towards the common good. That was that plus a general belief in the principles of you call it where you are. You don't steal somebody else's name and put it on your bottle of wine because it makes it easier for you to sell it. That's selfish. That's self-promoting, and it should be illegal. And so early on, even before we got the PGI approval, early on there have been a lot of people supporting that same principle, both locally and then in other regions.
Tell me what this, if anything, what this means for consumers. Does this change anything for consumers of Oregon wine?
This should reassure people who want to buy wines that they identify as Willamette Valley, that what they're going to get when they open a bottle of wine is from the Willamette Valley. It's not going to be from some other place, and it's also not going to be made in a way that isn't the typical Willamette Valley approach. We don't want to shackle people here in the industry, but we did have to specify for the geographic indications work that we did have to specify in general how we make wines and what those wines then looked like, what the grapes looked like going into them, how much, also what sort of yield you had per acre, that sort of thing. There's a lot more detail for the PGI than we require for the AVA here in the U.S. because, again, it is not a qualitative evaluation of whether this is good enough or made in a certain way. They don't get into the product in the AVAs. They just get into where you grow it, and do you have a right to call it something.
And so in that case, does it affect anything for producers here or for grape growers here? Is there anything that will change for them going forward?
I think the same consumer confidence that we have for wines here in the U.S., people in other countries can have that same confidence, and also their interest should be piqued by the fact that we are recognized by the EU, and we're one of 2 AVAs in the U.S. that are. So if they want to try, if they're serious about wines and they want to try wines from the United States, they might start looking at these 2 first. It's the same for distributors in foreign countries. It should open up at least an interest and a general positive awareness of the Willamette Valley. So consumers and distributors and retailers and restaurateurs all should be very confident in the wines that they buy. If it's from the Willamette Valley, the EU as well as the U.S. and the Willamette Valley, they are certifying that this is a valid Willamette Valley product.
So I imagine there had to have been some obviously some challenges along the way up. First of all, I'm curious if there were people inside the Willamette Valley who thought this was a bad idea, or people you ran into who didn't want this status for some reason.
As we proposed this, and I was one-man band on it, but 1 or 2 other people agreed, yeah, that sounds good. have a good time, Harry. But there are others who would answer my call to get together for a 3 or 4 person meeting to go over some technical aspect. So we had good people, Anthony King, Dave Adelsheim, Jana McCamey, several others. We had good support that way. Nobody was negative about it, but there was really not a lot of need unless I called people together on things. There wasn't a lot of need for a cast of thousands to be working on this. This fit well with my loner persona.
What about from the political standpoint? Was this a politically, in the state of Oregon, were there political interests against this in any way?
Not that I know of. Everybody was very positive. There have been congratulations from all parts of the state outside of the Willamette Valley. There have been good friends there that gave kudos. Mm-hmm. So no, there hasn't been a problem there. The only political ramifications to this that are at all possible, we've heard of few rumblings when we not only proposed it but gave updates on where we were, both at the mission to the EU in Brussels, depending on who the ambassador was. There were kind of skeptical, we're supposed to not really do things like this. You're going to hurt our trade negotiations. As we all know, wine has been used as a trading item in negotiations with the EU. I mean, instead of going head to head on aerospace, Boeing versus Airbus, they drag in wine and other things that are ridiculous to include in those negotiations. But even if they're only talking wine too, one of the sensitive things for the U.S. trade representative, who is the focal point for negotiations between countries, the U.S. trade representative has to balance all the constituencies here in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And guess who they listen to? Would they listen to maybe a 40-acre vineyard in the Ribbon Ridge area of the Willamette Valley and say, we'll do what's best for you guys and people like you? Or would they listen to people that are, I don't know, you might spell their name Gallo, or other people in a wine alliance from California or other large states, and they do the latter. And guess who still owns the names Champagne and Chablis and Hargitty Burgundy, and you go down the list, and it's the large people who have been doing it for a long time, and they feel that they've earned the right to steal somebody's name. And so in some of the trade negotiations that have gone forward, and the support of this international group that I talked about, that has prompted fairly positive negotiations between the EU and the U.S., such that we, the U.S. in 2006, decided that yes, we would give up the right to steal other people's names, and except for those people who still have them and had them as of a certain date, they would be grandfathered in. And that's still the case, but there was an agreement in 2006 that people would come back within a couple of years or so and fine-tune that and see where things were going. But that hasn't been picked up on. So that's actually one of the action items for this international group and for others within the U.S. and the EU to push that along and get some of these promised meetings between U.S. trade representative and the EU, get them back into a bargaining room. I'm not sure where that question started. It ended there, but
political challenges. So
yeah,
it's a good ending.
It's definitely the most. It's the only negative that I've gotten out of this, and so it's been from visits to the mission in Brussels and general visits to the U.S. trade representatives' meetings in D.C.
Yeah, so on that note, I'm curious about, with your role and the amount of time, give us an idea of how much sort of in-person meeting there was. How many times were you out in the world representing the Willamette Valley in this process? And was your role as a presenter, or was your role as part of a roundtable?
An active participant in the group that I've talked about, the Wine Origins Alliance. That's on a regular basis, and that's something that I'm gradually giving up. The Willamette Valley Wineries Association and the Oregon Wine Growers Association are both supportive of the work that I started doing. I'm gladly handing batons off to people to participate in the group. That sometimes takes a trip somewhere in the U.S. or to Europe or somewhere. I've also had to go to Europe, specifically to Brussels, a couple times to present to the people who would be approving the PGI. And to meet and encourage them to hurry up and give us an approval. And we've had some meetings here, but there have only been a couple trips, and I think I might have gotten a little bit of one of the trips reimbursed by some of the organizations, but in general it's been the one-man band and getting his own bus tickets.
Did it surprise you at all that there was the level of interest from an EU, an international group in the Willamette Valley? Was the level of recognition and respect for the Willamette Valley at the beginning surprising to you?
It wasn't surprising because I'm not sure it was there. I think we had to be present, and we had to be present almost every time. As the international group was talking about these common principles, and yet it didn't take long for us to tell the story of Oregon, and it is pretty exceptional. We as an area, we began 56 years ago, whatever it is, 56, and yet we began with these very developed principles. And to itemize all of the things that we began, I mean, our labeling laws, we began kicking them around and getting consensus on it. And as a matter of fact, not just consensus, but unanimity was required at that time. And the discussions and the proposal was out among people in the industry in 1974. It was approved as state legislation in 77, and so these state laws are, that's the most critical part of this, because it gives a general requirement that things be done a certain way. If not, and you're not in compliance, then you don't get to make wine here in Oregon or sell wine. And that's the ultimate kickback, and that's also part of what the PGI is for Europe. You don't get to sell wine in the European Union or other regions of the world that kind of honor the EU unless you agree to unless you adhere to all of the requirements. If you don't make it the way it's spelled out, then you don't get to sell it. That's the ultimate.
So going forward then with this status, how does the education process go now for consumers and for trade partners and for distributors and for all of that? How do you get the word out, and how long do you think it takes for it to become something that people are aware of?
That's the same question the Wine Origins Alliance asks itself. How do we get this message out? How do we make people aware? Are they aware already? And there's been a lot of movement. There's also been everything from advertising by individual members. I remember seeing Champagne full-page ads in the New Yorker about how can you make a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir if it's not from the Willamette Valley, or something of that. And they, of course, would have the Champagne ones and maybe Barolo. So it goes all the way from advertising for the average consumer to taking advantage of the awareness that's already there. There have been some studies of the consumer and how important or not the viticultural areas of AVAs or the GIs are in selecting their wines. And it's about twice as high as I thought it would be. I can't remember the numbers, but I think it's like 94% of the serious wine consumer considers that vital. So I think the education is out there some. I don't think we have to educate people on the Willamette Valley getting the PGI. I think it's good news, and so from a news standpoint, I think people need to know that and pat the Willamette Valley on its back, saying, way to go, yeah, and let us know how we can help. Oh, you can buy some of our wine.
Is there any kind of maintenance done with the status now? Is it something you have to keep reapplying for or working on going forward, or is this something that is basically a done deal at this point?
It's a done deal at this point. That isn't to say that we don't adhere to what we have said our processes and the parameters of grape growth and the legal side of our PGI is. We definitely need to be aware of it. Anybody who's interested can go online and see what we submitted, and those are the guidelines by which we have to operate. They can go on the Willamette Valley Wine Growers Association website and navigate towards wine origins and pick that out.
So with this completed and now announced to the world, is there another step for you in the process? Is there more to do in the state? Is there or is this kind of a project that you're considering yourself pretty much finished with?
I'm considering it finished. The thing that's never finished is getting out in the vineyard and pruning or doing something to make myself worthwhile. So it's kind of bringing it back home.
Excellent. Well, that's all the questions that I have for you about this. Is there anything I missed about the process or the status?
Well, you've allowed me to ramble, so I don't think there should be anything missing.
Well, thank you so much for explaining this to us and telling us about the importance, and thank you for all your hard work on behalf of the Valley. It's an amazing accomplishment, and so I appreciate you talking about it for us, and I appreciate all the work you did to do it. So,
well, super, and thanks for getting the word out that it's at this point accomplished. But The majority of the work goes to especially the pioneers, but to everybody in the wine industry. And it's a very broad-based industry now, all the way from you guys getting messages out there and capturing how we became what we are to those people who every day work in the vineyards or work in the wineries and work selling great Oregon and specifically Willamette Valley wines.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll go ahead and let you off the hook.
Super. Yep. Let's go nurse ourselves.